On August 6, 1945, during World War II, the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the world's first deployed atomic bomb, Little Boy, over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion wiped out 90% of the city and immediately killed 80,000 people. Tens of thousands more would later die of radiation exposure. 3 days later, a second B-29 dropped another A-bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 people. Japan's Emperor Hirohito announced his country's unconditional surrender in World War II in a radio address on August 15, citing the devastating powers of a new and most cruel bomb.
No surrender for the Japanese. At the time of the Trinity test, the Germans were defeated by the Allies. The Allies told Japan to surrender, but Japan vowed to fight. In 1944, it seemed like they had no chance of winning. Around April 1945, when President Harry Truman became president, and mid-July, Japan were making the Allies suffer with a lot of deaths, totaling nearly half those suffered in 3 years of war in the Pacific. This was showing Japan were stronger than before. The Allies' demand for surrender of Japan, and if they did refuse, they will be threatened with prompt and utter destruction. General Douglas MacArthur and some other commanders were in favor of continuing the conventional bombing of Japan. They advised the president an invasion would have a horrible result in U.S. casualties of 1 million. They said if they want to avoid a big casualties rate, the president decided to use an atomic bomb in hopes that it would end the war fast. They believed that this bomb would put the U.S. in a dominant position of the course of the post-war world.
Since 1940, the United States has been working on developing an atomic weapon after having warned by Albert Einstein that Nazi Germany was already conducting research into nuclear weapon. When the United States conducted the first success test, the first test they sent it at the desert in New Mexico in July 1945. During that time, Germany already had been defeated, but the war against Japan in the Pacific, however, continued to rage. President Harry S. Truman warned by some of his advisors that any attempt to invade Japan would result in horrific American consequences, ordered that the new weapon had been used to bring the war to a speedy end.
The Manhattan Project. U.S. officials created the Manhattan Project after receiving news that Adolf Hitler was working on his own nuclear weapon. The research for the bombs was originally conducted at Columbia University, the University of Chicago, and the University of California at Berkeley. The Army Corps of Engineers joined the Office of Scientific Research and Development to work on a nuclear weapon for the United States. Theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer was in charge of the Los Alamos Laboratory in Mexico. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was successfully detonated. The scientists at the Los Alamos Laboratory developed the uranium-based Little Boy and the plutonium-based Fat Man.
Radiation was released from the bombs, causing radiation sickness, burns, and cancer in the following years. The people involved with the bombings had a 46% chance of developing leukemia. There was also an increase in thyroid cancer, lung cancer, and breast cancer. More people developed keloids and cataracts due to exposure with radiation. According to the Department of Energy's history of the Manhattan Project, the death toll in Hiroshima came close to 200,000 people. 63% of the buildings in Hiroshima were destroyed, and another 29% were damaged. In Nagasaki, the death toll rose to 75,000 people. The oleander flower became the official flower of Hiroshima. It was the first to bloom from the wasteland after the bombing.
The start of the Cold War. In August 1945, the U.S. detonated 2 atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The intention was to force Japan to surrender, thus avoiding a long war in the Pacific. This action added potential of pressurizing the USSR into negotiating over Eastern Europe and Germany. However, the fact that the U.S. President Truman did not inform Stalin of his intent to deploy nuclear weapons had the opposite effect. Stalin was offended, and his suspicion and distrust for the West intensified. So this began for 2 giants to clash heads and plan for war.